Hey everyone, Demonite here. How many elements are there in Borderlands, the pre-sequel? There are the 6 obvious ones: non-elemental, incendiary, corrosive, shock, explosive and cryo. But it turns out that there are at least 3 more. The first one some of you will be familiar with, the second one only occurs in niche scenarios, and the third one you couldn't even know about unless you've had access to modded guns before, but even then you probably didn't notice. So let's start with the one you might already know about, being the E-Gun's unique element. The E-Gun is a laser you get from the sub-level 13 side quest, and it is used to kill the ghosts that appear there. It's the only gun capable of hurting them. At first glance it looks like it deals non-elemental damage, since its damage numbers are white and don't proc any status effects. However, it actually has a unique element that has the same health type multipliers as incendiary damage, meaning more damage against flesh and less against armor and shields. But it isn't affected by additional incendiary resistances enemies may have, like this Inferno.exe. And because it is neither non-elemental or incendiary, it has some unique interactions with skills that care about elements, so let's go over those. Elemental damage boosts of any kind, including Athena's Maelstrom, do not affect the E-Gun's element. Nisha's skills Magnificent 6 and Hot Lead don't work with the E-Gun either. Aurelia's Next to Cleanliness, on the other hand, does boost its damage. The E-Gun also does not cause her avalanche stacks to decay. And lastly, if you have Jax sponsored by and swap from the E-Gun to another weapon, then that weapon will deal additional non-elemental damage. In this case, it's the real kind of non-elemental damage, not the E-Gun's element. The same happens when you swap from the Minex Atonement to another weapon, by the way. And if you swap from the Minex Atonement or another E-Gun to the E-Gun, you get to deal both fake and real non-elemental damage at the same time. Now let's get to the next unconventional element, which is maybe more accurately described as a lack of an element, as it doesn't have any health type multipliers. In other words, it always deals neutral damage against flesh, armor and shields. This occurs in multiple instances. For example, when you jump on an enemy, you deal a tiny amount of what seems to be non-elemental damage, but it isn't. I tested it by jumping on this turret in Triton Flats. The turret has both a shield and armored health, and non-elemental damage should deal 20% less damage against armor. Jumping down from this pole up here while boosting with an Oz kit but without butt stomping will always deal 8 damage to the turret, whether you hit it with its shield up or not. If the damage was reduced by 20%, it should be 6 or 7 damage to the armor instead. Furthermore, I also tried increasing the non-elemental damage modifier in Cheat Engine to see if it made a difference, and it didn't. This applies to the Stingray's version of jumping onto enemies as well. Its downward slam attack also appears to be neutral rather than non-elemental damage. But more importantly, neutral damage occurs with 2 of Athena's skills, Rend and You've Got Red on You. The damage numbers of these skills show up as red, since it's supposed to be bleed damage, and once again it deals the same damage to any health type. Rend is affected by type A and B melee modifiers, while You've Got Red on You is affected by grenade damage. Rend's bleed status effect is also boosted by the status effect damage you get from your badass rank. This badass rank bonus also applies to the last instance of neutral damage that I'm aware of, being the damage over time enemies suffer when you shatter their oxygen masks. You can't really test this one against multiple health types since it bypasses shields, but I used Cheat Engine again to modify my non-elemental damage and it didn't change anything. And finally, we get to the hidden element that doesn't appear during vanilla gameplay. This is because this element is tied to weapons that can't be obtained anywhere, which are laser rifles that had their elements removed, for example using Gibbed. Just like with the E-Gun, these lasers deal wide damage numbers but are not actually non-elemental. Unlike the E-Gun, they don't have the same multipliers as incendiary damage and instead have completely unique multipliers. They deal 100% damage against flesh, 150% damage against armor, and 50% damage against shields. This also doesn't change between normal mode and true/ultimate Vault Hunter mode. When it comes to skills, they work exactly the same as the E-Gun. Elemental damage boosts don't do anything, Magnificent 6 and Hot Lead don't work with them, next to Cleanliness does boost them, they don't cause avalanche stacks to decay, and Sponsored By will add real non-elemental damage to other guns. This happens with almost every laser you remove the element from, by the way, but surprisingly the E-gun is an exception. When you remove the E-gun's unique element with Gibbed, it doesn't actually do anything except for changing the color of its battery. The damage multipliers stay the same and it still damages ghosts. There are also some lasers where the element is tied to the projectile rather than the gun itself, like the ZX-1 or the Min-Min lighter, so merely using Gibbed to remove the element doesn't do anything to them either. Lastly, while we're on the topic of deceiving damage types, vehicles lie to you. When you run over an enemy, you will deal non-elemental damage to it, but if you go fast enough, it switches to explosive damage. Or at least that's what the game wants you to believe, because this yellow damage number is actually still non-elemental damage. Well, kinda, let me explain. When you hit an enemy that has either flash or a shield, both numbers will always deal the same damage, even though explosive damage should deal 20% less against shields. I used Cheat Engine again to change my damage modifiers, and the non-elemental modifier affected both the white and yellow damage numbers, while the explosive modifier, or just any explosive boost you can obtain in game, didn't affect either. However, if you hit an armored enemy, the white damage number is reduced by 20%, while the yellow number is not. Non-elemental damage is supposed to deal less against armor, so the white number behaves correctly, but the yellow number still acts like explosive damage in this one specific way. But anyway, that's it for this video, just some little trivia I thought I'd share. As always, thanks for watching and see ya everyone.